Благослови, душе моя Господа, благословен еси Господи. Благослови, душе моя Господа, и вся внутренняя моя, имя святое Его.
Your Excellency, Your Beatitude, dear brothers and sisters, I'm very pleased to speak again this year in your company about this very important talk. Thank you, Father Ron, for your presentation. My talk will not be very academic or theological, but more personal reflection on the concept of sister churches, and I would like especially to reflect on the experience of ecumenical twinnings. In fact, one of my first ecumenical experiences as a young Dominican took place shortly after my novitiate. It was in 1995 at Sylvanus Abbey in south of France. This Abbey of Sylvanus, thanks to the inspiration of a Dominican, Father André Gouze, had become an important liturgical center and maintained many ecumenical links throughout the world. A remarkable friendship linked Father André Gouze to the young Russian Orthodox Bishop of Kostroma in the north of Moscow. From this friendship stemmed in the early 90s the amazing project to bring to Sylvanus, a very small village in the Aveyron in South France, to bring in Sylvanus a Russian church offered as a gift by this young Russian Orthodox bishop, Alexander. Thus, a magnificent wooden church was specially built in Russia, dismantled, transported by train across Europe, and reconstructed in Sylvanus in 1993. And this church is today one of the largest, probably the largest, and most beautiful wooden Russian Orthodox church in Western Europe. As a young Dominican, I was asked in the summer of 1996 to organize visits of this church for pilgrims and tourists. And in order to enrich my comments, I began to study in more details Eastern architecture and liturgy. And this was the beginning of my interest in the Orthodox Church, but also of many encounters. Indeed, in response to the donation made by the Orthodox Diocese of Kostroma to Sylvanus, Father André Gouze contributed, thanks to the support of Catholic patrons, to the construction of an Orthodox church in the city of Kostroma. Thus, in the following years, I had the opportunity to stay in this Russian Orthodox Diocese of Kostroma during the summer, accompanying young Catholics who came to help build the church offered by Catholics. This adventure led to innumerable bonds of friendship between French Catholics and Russian Orthodox, a list too extensive to mention here. If I have wanted to call to mind this story, it is because it seems to me to illustrate particularly well the fact that ecumenism needs to be built on the dialogue of charity at the local level and taking into account the psychological dimension. I would like to return to each of these three aspects before emphasizing in particular the importance of ecumenical twinning on the path towards Christian unity. The dialogue of charity must always precede and accompany the dialogue of truth. In the Byzantine liturgy, when the deacon introduces the sign of peace and the profession of faith, he says, "Let us love each other so that in unity of mind we profess our faith." The dialogue of charity, in which Patriarch Athenagoras and Blessed Pope Paul VI engaged their respective churches, drew from the liturgy this idea that the kiss of peace is necessary to profess in common the Christian faith. The dialogue of charity is the foundation on which we build the dialogue of truth. But at the same time, this dialogue of truth itself also concerns the dialogue of charity. Theological dialogue must not only deal with the dogmatic differences of the past, but also with the current relations of our churches. Indeed, thanks to the act of the 7th December 1965, which lifted the mutual excommunication of 1054, the dialogue of charity was no longer understood merely as a preparation for the dialogue of truth or a parallel process intended to facilitate it, but as a theology in action, opening new ecclesiological perspectives. The actions undertaken between churches carry a theological meaning. Metropolitan Meliton affirmed in this sense, I quote, "Loving each other and dialoguing in charity, we do theology, or rather, we build theologically." End of quote. In this perspective, the relations between our churches in all their dimensions can be considered as a privileged locus theologicus, as Patriarch Athenagoras said concisely about his meeting with Paul VI in 1964, I quote, "Leaders of churches act, theologians explain." Leaders of church do not have to wait for the theological justification, but theologians have to justify what the leaders of the church do. At a time when relations between our churches are intensifying, it seems more than ever necessary to undertake, in the context of these tangible relations, a theological rereading, a theology of the dialogue of charity. A second essential aspect, if we look at the history of the ecumenical movement in the Catholic Church, is that this movement was not initially the fruit of a centralized policy, but of local initiatives. In the 20s and 30s of the 20th century, even though participation in the ecumenical movement was prohibited in the Catholic Church, encyclical Mortalium Animos of 1928 forbade any participation to any Catholic to any ecumenical meeting. Nevertheless, a multitude of scattered projects emerged in France, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands to promote Christian unity according to a model different to unionism. Among many examples, and citing only the Catholic Church, one can mention the Malines Conversation in 1921-1925, the foundation of the Monastery of Shepstone in Belgium in 1925, the organization of the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity in Lyon in 1933 by Father Paul Couturier, the creation in 1937 of the Groupe des Dons, the first group of theological dialogue between Catholic and Lutherans. The foundation in Germany by Father Max Major in 1938 of the Ecumenical Fraternity Una Santa, All these peripheral initiatives were initially to encounter the opposition of the Holy See before the Second Vatican Council marked what St. John Paul II called the ecumenical conversion of the Catholic Church. This birth of the ecumenical movement in the Catholic Church seems to confirm what Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger stated in his book, The Principles of Catholic Theology, on the essentially local aspect of ecumenism. I quote, "If the local church is not simply the ultimate reflection of the universal church, but an immediate and real realization of the church itself, then local ecumenism is not simply the executive organ of the church at the summit, but the original form of ecumenism and a normal starting point for theological knowledge," end of quote. According to Joseph Ratzinger, ecumenism is not primarily the implementation of universal principles, but the theological understanding of a practice experienced locally. It does not mean, according to him, to seek how the knowledge and experience of the universal church in ecumenical matters can be realized in the local churches, but to develop through practice an ecumenical thought. I quote, "The passage from thought to practice is at the same time," said Ratzinger, "is at the same time the means of testing thought and controlling its validity. It will also have an effect in return on the form of thought. It can modify it, criticize, limit, or advance it." Indeed, in the Catholic world, but not only there, ecumenism clearly starts from the bottom, he said. The path is opened by charismatic personalities or by restricted groups, end of quote. Challenged with the observation of the slowing down of ecumenism at the summit, the future Pope Benedict saw, I quote, "a new appeal to local churches and to experiences that are possible only within them. As long as we understand it, we can very well say that we need pioneers again for the future," end of quote. The essentially local dimension of ecumenism, emphasized by Joseph Ratzinger, goes hand in hand with another third fundamental dimension, the psychological aspect. This is particularly important in the relations between Catholics and Orthodox. As an unknown pioneer of ecumenism, director of the Center Istina in Paris, my predecessor when I was there, Father Christophe Jean Dumont affirmed in his 1963 memorandum to Paul VI on relations with Orthodox, Father Dumont considered that the stumbling blocks between Catholics and Orthodox are 90% psychological. And he noted, I quote, "One of the most urgent initiatives is the multiplication of personal contacts, individual or small groups, in an atmosphere of friendship and mutual help. This at all levels, from the simple faithful to the members of the hierarchy and to the top." He added, "We must not wait to be invited to undertake. We must set an example even if we are not immediately paid back." And with the pragmatism that characterized Father Dumont, he proposed also concrete measures manifesting signs of fraternity, reception of seminarians and students, trainings of monasteries, academic, social and cultural collaborations, personal relations between bishops, etc. It was in 1963. These considerations have not lost their relevance, especially as regards relations between Catholic and Orthodox. At the time of the communist regimes, ecumenical relations concerned only very small circles of the ecclesiastical hierarchy of these countries. The freedom of worship which re-emerged in the early 90s has shown that sensitivity to the issue of unity to ecumenical relations was far from being widespread among the faithful, nor was it among most Catholic faithful before Vatican II. In addition, interfaith relations are often influenced by national issues to which they are inextricably intertwined, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. These relationships are fraught with a sometimes century-old history of conflictual national relations, whose confessional aspect is often only an outward appearance. One need only think of the relations between Russian Orthodox and the Polish Catholics, between Croatian Catholics and Serbian Orthodox, or between Ukrainian Greek Catholics and Russian Orthodox. Long before theological questions, it is the psychological factors that predominate. In such contexts, churches do not first need theological agreements, but reconciliation. A common rereading of history, a mutual forgiveness, are necessary to allow the purification of memory. In this process, the indispensable requirement is to become deeply acquainted with each other in order to acquire an authentic shared understanding. Within the ecumenical movement, the experience of Franco-German reconciliation, which was largely the result of the practice of twinning in the 1950s, has probably not been sufficiently considered. Long before the signing of the Élysée Treaty of 1963, which provided a political and legal framework for Franco-German reconciliation, the twinning of municipalities in the post-war period allowed for a rapid and profound transformation of mentalities between the two peoples that 3 wars in 70 years had opposed. Convinced that the municipality was the basic lever of political and social life, mayors promoted large-scale twinning between their cities. The first twinnings of the post-war period were concluded within the framework of the International Union of Mayors for Franco-German Understanding. It was within the framework of this union that the first Franco-German twinning was undertaken in 1950 between the cities of Montbéliard and Ludwigsburg. Another organization, the Council of European Municipalities, created in 1944, aimed more broadly at promoting the European spirit. This council developed a twinning practice with a deep Christian inspiration. Twinning agreements had several components: youth, sports, student exchanges, choir meeting, cultural projects, meetings between elected officials, but also economic activities. Today, there are nearly 2,500 twinnings between French and German cities and local authorities, and more than 3/4 of the French and German population live in a municipality twinned with a municipality of the partner country. Without these twinnings promoted by Christians in 1950, Franco-German reconciliation, an unprecedented phenomenon in history and which was at the heart of the European project, would have been much more protracted and more uncertain. The ecumenical movement also gave birth to interdenominational twinning. To quote examples that are closer to my own experience, I would like to mention a twinning that had existed since 1970 between the Catholic Diocese of Arras in North France and the Anglican Diocese of Canterbury. Delegations of about 15 people from both dioceses meet every year on topics of research or current events. This diocesan twinning has given rise to local twinnings of deaneries, schools, as well as cooperation in training courses and common pilgrimages. Another remarkable example of this type of twinning is the St. Petersburg Seattle Sister Churches program, founded in 1988 on the occasion of the millennium of the baptism of Ruth. At the invitation of the leaders of the main denomination of Seattle, Orthodox, Catholic, Episcopalian, Protestant, an Orthodox delegation from Leningrad visited Seattle in 1988. In 1989, Metropolitan Alexei of Leningrad, future Patriarch of Moscow, went to Seattle with a delegation also including the leaders of the Baptist, Catholic, and Armenian Apostolic communities of Leningrad. From that year on, exchanges of delegations have taken place almost every year and have been accompanied by numerous initiatives in the charitable, cultural, and spiritual fields. As early as 1989, 10,000 Bibles in Russian were donated by the Sister Churches program, each purchased by a Christian from Seattle, with names indicated, as well as the address of their parishes, to be offered to another Christian from Leningrad. Relationships were particularly fruitful in the medical field. Many exchanges took place between the Sisters of Providence Hospital in Seattle and the St. Xenia Hospital in Leningrad, including sending teams of specialists, donating equipment and drugs, specialized internships in Seattle, and notably training in hospital chaplaincy. Exchanges with Seattle Children's Hospital contributed to Father Alexander Tkachenko founding in 2010 of St. Petersburg Children's Hospital, thanks to the training provided and also several fundraising operations in the United States. The exchanges also concerned prison pastoral care, with visits to prisons in the states of Washington or the Leningrad region. In the cultural field, exchanges of choirs which were organized. In 1990, the choir of the Leningrad Theological Academy was invited to Seattle. It was the first trip of a Soviet Union choir to the United States. And in return, the choir of Seattle St. James Cathedral went to the Soviet Union and gave concerts in many Orthodox churches. Subsequently, many choirs were invited from both sides. Iconographers from St. Petersburg were also invited to give iconography workshops in Seattle. The St. Petersburg Academy of Theology was particularly involved in this program. In 1993, the ecumenical leader of the Episcopal Diocese of Seattle was able to study for 3 months at the St. Petersburg Academy. And in 1996, a Seattle librarian came to help the library at the same academy to computerize the catalog. In 1997, Father Robert Spitzer of Seattle University, a Jesuit, was invited to give lectures at the St. Petersburg Academy on business ethics. Beginning in 1994, trainings were organized between parishes of St. Petersburg in St. Petersburg and Seattle parishes, including the Orthodox Parish of the Holy Trinity and the Presbyterian Parish of Seattle. The latter provided significant assistance during the fire of the Church of the Holy Trinity in 2006. One of the last events of this program was the visit in 2012 to Seattle of Archbishop Ambrosi, the rector of the Theological Academy of St. Petersburg, and the internship of seminarians from the St. Petersburg Academy at Seattle hospitals. If I have wanted to call it to mind this St. Petersburg Seattle Sister Churches program, it is because it seems to me to be exemplary, based on personal relations, disinterested friendship, fidelity, and putting the weakest at the heart of its concern, without forgetting the cultural and spiritual dimension. Many similar examples in the world certainly exist. However, these examples remain marginal. We are far from the 2,500 Franco-German twinnings. We can only hope that such twinnings multiply between dioceses, between parishes, between schools and universities, between monasteries, between choirs. One could even dream that some kind of association or international union of these Christian trainings will be founded in order to facilitate their realization, especially between Orthodox and Catholics. This is especially necessary in areas of tension or conflict. If countries such as France and Germany have been able to reconcile dramatically, mainly through twinning, could not churches further promote such twinnings between them, especially in Central or Eastern Europe? In conclusion, I would like to highlight two essential dimensions of twinning. Twinning is a way to rediscover fraternity. Pope Francis insists very much on the importance of fraternity, as we know well, a fraternity that is to be found on the way. The Pope often takes the example of Jacob's son, as the son of Jacob found fraternity on their way, so Christians, if they set out, will recognize each other as brothers. Fraternity is an essential dimension of ecumenism of the Holy Father, who exclaims at the Holy Sepulchre, I quote, "Every time we put behind us our long-standing prejudices and find the courage to build new fraternal relationships, we confess that Christ is truly risen." Fraternity, but also friendship. Most of the twinnings that I have mentioned are stories of friendship. They have been carried by friendships and have generated new friendships themselves. The ecumenical movement has been driven by great friendships. Father Congar wrote about the friendship between two pioneers of ecumenism, Father Portal and Lord Halifax. I quote, "Portal owes to Lord Halifax friendship an understanding of things that no book could offer." In a lecture given at Louvain in 1925, Father Fernand Portal spoke of the role of friendship in the union of churches. He gave, as a first example, the friendship of Vladimir Solovyov and Henri Laurin, the first president of the Social Weeks of France. Then, the example of his old friendship with Lord Halifax, who was at the origin of the Malines conversations. I quote, Portal, "To those of today and to those of tomorrow, will I be permitted to say that there is a way to multiply their forces? I want to talk about friendship. A friend, a true friend, is a gift of God, even if one sees only the sweetness of being united in joy as in sorrow. But if we meet a soul that corresponds to our highest aspirations, who considers the ideal of his life to work for the Church, that is to say for Jesus Christ, our Master, the union is based on that which is the deepest. And if it turns out that these two Christians are separated, that they belong to different churches, to different backgrounds, but that they want with all their energy to break down the barriers, and for that reason they conquer in action, what power will they not have?" End of quote. This is most probably an example of the kind of friends that our churches need on their way to unity. These friends are, as Joseph Ratzinger says, the pioneers we need for the future. Thank you.
Благослови, душе моя Господа, и вся внутренняя моя, имя святое